What's up, my friends? Welcome to the Pastel Primer. So check this out. I'm here in quarantine, rocking my quarantine haircut. And this video is gonna be edited remotely. So we wanted to get this out to y'all without delay because I know a lot of you are using the Pastel Pack already. So we wanted to have an official primer to get you into the entire pack. So we'll divide this up into 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to talk about kind of recommendations and guidance in terms of how to shoot for this style. Part 2 is going to be all about editing for this style, and we'll cover the different lighting conditions as well. And then in part 3, I'm going to show you how do you customize the look if you want to make tweaks and adjustments to each of the presets and save those out. So let's go ahead and talk about number 1, or part 1, which is how do you shoot for this style? We're going to kind of piece this out as well. So in shooting for this style, the first thing that I would say, and this isn't necessarily going to make or break the look, but what I like to do is make sure that my subject matter sort of matches the overall look and effect. And what I mean by this is that Fuji 400H or any of these film emulation kind of styles or inspired by film kind of looks, they are vintage looks, right? They're looks from the past. So to me, I feel like the subject matter and the way that the image is shot needs to line up with what we might kind of expect of an old film photo. So that means modern lighting techniques. That means, having subjects that might be driving a brand spanking new car. All those types of things are going to throw off a little bit of the vibe of the look. So this is the first thing that I kind of want to iterate is it reiterate when you've only iterated it once? I don't know. This first thing I want to say is that the overall style, the way something is shot, the wardrobe, the everything, the mood, the lighting, it all should tie to that kind of film inspired look or what we would expect from a vintage photograph. So let me show you exactly what I mean by that. As I'm looking through this sample set of images, you have here this first Indian bride, and again, she's in this traditional Indian outfit, which the viewer would not know whether that is modern or whether that is, kind of vintage. It has almost this kind of crossover between them, right? I have here there's actually a couple right here and she has this cute little, almost this kind of lacy dress, works very perfectly for this kind of a look. I've got my interracial couple right here. Some of you asked what this looks like over black people's skin versus white people's skin, and I have an actual couple and I can demonstrate exactly what it looks like in the same photograph. Again, another kind of bohemian inspired Indian wedding. This will work perfectly over that. You have another kind of flower, like you look at all the styling of these images and they kind of fit that vintage sort of vibe, right? So every one of the images that you see here has that kind of look and has that kind of vibe, a little bit of a whimsical nature. The next piece is that sort of whimsical nature to it, okay? So for example, this is a shot of Chris and V. Their outfits are great, kind of has a little vintage vibe with a skinny tie and the flower and the two-tone jacket. But you'll notice that I'm also kind of trying to shoot these authentic moments, allowing a little bit of these imperfections into the shot. In this shot, it's having a slight tilt to the moment and kind of catching this nice expression between the two of them. This is what I call building in these kind of perfectly imperfect details, okay? So for example, in this image, I'm allowing hard light to cross over the body and over the dress. Again, this kind of imperfect detail that adds a sense of whimsical nature to a shot. It makes it more natural. It's also going to give us a chance to see how the preset renders out these highlights. And if film, if we were to kind of look back at something that's film inspired, it should have a really nice shadow to highlight transition the way that film did. Okay, so again, a lot of these have that kind of vibe to them in terms of the way that they're shot. We're not trying to get to these perfectly produced images. And when we are using lighting, this is the other big thing. When we are using lighting, we generally want that lighting to look natural. So if I look here at Ryan Jackie's maternity, what was going on was that the sun was right behind the mountain as we started shooting, and then as soon as we began shooting, the sun disappeared behind the mountain. So I wanted to set up a light that would replicate that. And so instead of, I didn't have any sunlight whatsoever, I put a flash up, but that flash is literally emulating the sunlight. I placed it all the way back up on this hill where the sun was, and I'm firing it down full power to simulate natural sunlight. So every one of the shots, despite them being flashed, still looks natural. And that's what I want to encourage is when you are lighting for this type of a look, you want to light in ways that looks and feels natural. And when you look at vintage looks, like if you're indoors, you're talking about a lot of tungsten kind of lights. You're kind of talking about a lot of harder light sources. You're talking about direct flash. All those kind of things are the ways that we would have lit a vintage image. These kind of crazy, dramatic, off-camera flash type stuff, that wasn't really a look that was popular back then. So when you throw it against this Fuji 400 vibe, to me, it feels a little bit off, okay? Not saying that you can't or that it's gonna break the photograph. I just want you guys to piece together what the look is supposed to be so you can convincingly pull it off. So indoors like this shot, for example, we're using this mixture of daylight and tungsten light to kind of create this natural mood to the image. So it is lit, but it's lit in a way that looks natural. All right, let's talk now about white balance as well as exposure. So when it comes to exposure, I want you guys to do the same thing that you have been doing, which means that if we're looking at the histogram, y'all are exposing to the left to make sure the shadows are not clipped, okay? So we're pulling it down so the shadows aren't clipped. We're allowing the camera to pick up as many highlights as possible. It's that same method of exposure. So this one would have been a little bit overexposed in camera. Okay, let's take another look at this one. This one's a little bit overexposed. It would have been right about here, okay? So again, this is gonna depend on your camera's leeway and whatnot, but we say to go towards this shadow side because on a lot of, well, let's say older Canon cameras, as well as a lot of older cameras in general, if you're exposing for the highlights, I'm gonna show you an example of that in a second, but if you're exposed for the highlights and everything is dark in the shadows, you end up with very green shadows. So this is a good example. The baseline exposure is almost spot on where our shadows are all retained, highlights are all retained, okay? Let me show you what I mean by an underexposure. So this shot, some cameras, like say on a Nikon or Sony, you could probably expose it about -3 like this just to keep all the highlights in the background, right? And even then when you get into post and you brighten it up, you've got like 4 or 5 stops of range in the shadows and it looks fine. On a Canon camera, it's not gonna look that way. And this is why it's safer to say expose to the left, let the camera pick up as many of the highlights as it possibly can, okay? So depending on your camera model, it's gonna dictate how far to the left you're going because it'll show you the shadows and you just wanna make sure the shadows basically aren't clipped and then allow the camera to pick up the rest. So that's kind of the details as far as the exposure goes, okay? So for an image like this, I would have pulled this down and about right here would be the proper exposure for even a Canon camera where we don't have any shadows clipped, okay? So next, what about white balance? Well, I'm gonna say shoot with whatever you prefer, right? If you like to show the clients, images from the back of the camera, you might still wanna shoot a little bit warm so it looks more flattering and pleasing. But generally this look is gonna be more of a neutral look, which means that in any scene, I wanna shoot the image for neutral skin tones. So neutral skin tones would be somewhere like probably around 4750-ish. Because once you apply the preset, it's gonna nix a lot of these color tones. And so for example, if I apply soft light right now, all I'm gonna do is brighten up the image and you'll see that the skin tones fall perfectly in line with this neutral kind of look to it. So that's not a problem if you shoot warm. Just know that when you apply that preset, it almost looks like a sepia tone image because it's pulling a lot of these color tones out. So if you have a lot of warmth to the image, where modern has more leeway, right? Modern, if I had soft light right here and I kind of apply it, it has this kind of sort of leeway in there where it's kind of a lot of that is to taste, okay? But with pastel, we really want to get that on the neutral side and you want to get it dialed in. And a couple 100 degrees difference makes a big difference in pastel. So that's enough on that side. Let's go ahead and dive into how to edit for this style. So we're just going to jump through several of these images. I'm going to show you guys what I love about it. Let's go ahead and go back to this scene right here. And we're going to start with just a baseline exposure. So I'm going to go ahead and just apply pastel, soft light. This is the one that you're going to use. Same thing. If this is the look that you're aiming for with a shoot, you're just going to apply it on import, right? And then I'm going to apply without vignette. So I'm going to add profile correction and turn off the vignetting. This is one of my preferences, and I'm going to show you how to build this into your presets. I didn't want to build it into everything because our previous system, we're not building in profile corrections into any of the presets. So we didn't want to kind of break the rules and build it in. Although I do apply it more often than not. So all I'm going to do from here is I'm going to brighten up the image to get to a nice white point. And then I'm going to start seeking my white balance. Okay, so if you want, zoom in on the skin tone so you have a little more detail there and start looking for the white balance. And right about, I would say here, I'm going to add a little bit of greens and a little bit more temperature. This is where I get to where the skin tones look nice and bright, okay? Then I'm simply going to go to the next image. You can hit previous, okay? And then what we could do is just bring down the exposure a little bit. And look, the white balance is almost perfectly dialed in. I'm going to cool this one a little bit since it's a little bit closer. And let's see if we want a little bit more green versus a little more reds in the image. These small adjustments on these images make a massive difference. And that's where it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to if you're used to other types of looks and effects, because you can be a little more heavy-handed with other looks. So I'm going to put this right here. Then we're going to go to this final image and click previous. Now here we have an image that has flares and also reduced contrast to begin with. So if you want, you can flip this over to backlit and it's automatically going to add back in the overall contrast for the photograph. Now I'm going to look for that same white balance setting, okay, right about here. And now the beauty in pastel comes when you put these three together and you see the skin tones and all the colors and everything as it kind of works in this beautiful spread, right? Let's go ahead and do another image. Let's go ahead and do this image right here. So this shot is pretty much spot on, straight out of camera. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and if I were to import with soft light, I would look at it and say, okay, do I like the way that it looks right here, or do I want it to be a little bit softer? You can use these stylistically, right? So hard light kind of flattens out the highlights and the shadows a little bit for hard light scenes. So if you want something to have a little bit less contrast, just add that in. But I like the contrast of soft light. I'm going to go ahead and go without vignette. The only thing that I really want to do here is sometimes your profile correction will almost create a reverse vignette where it gets too white along the edges. So after this, I'll drop in a radial burn in the center. So that kind of evens it out, okay? And then from here, I would look for my white balance. So I'm going to take a read off something and just see kind of where the shirt and where everything is at, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and leave the tint down a little bit, and I'm just going to reduce the temperature a little bit and then brighten this up. Okay. If you want a little bit more magenta, you can always add a little bit more. So this is one of those things that's very different from other styles that we edit in, is you're looking at how bright the image is. It's very, very bright compared to kind of where we would typically edit, right? So same thing on this one. I'm going to go ahead and apply the previous. This is where I also like to, so I'm going to go ahead and apply previous. I'm going to brighten this one up. Okay. Now, as I get to these other images and I apply it, I do notice that I'm a little bit on the cold side. So what I'm going to do is just grab one of these and I'm going to click to see where the white balance, let's go tint up to +9, and let's just add barely. And as soon as you hit that point right here, you're good. Like, I have my skin tones back. I'm good to go, right? If I start getting up here, everything takes on a yellow tone. So right about here is where I like it. And now I'm just going to make a quick comparison between the 4 images, and they look good. Okay. So I would make a little tweak to each one of these. So for example, this one looks a little bit dark, so I might pull that up a little bit. And it looks like there was some direct sunlight on the previous one. On this one, there's not. So I'm going to warm it up just a tiny, tiny bit. This one looks good. I like the warmth. This one's spot on. Perfect. Okay. So now let's go to a scene like this, because this is an HDR scene, right? So we have all of our detail there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a pastel HDR. Now, a pastel HDR is going to look pastel. So even though it's retaining all the colors in the image, it's still a beautiful, bright image, right? So I'm going to go ahead and get a white balance read off of them, and I'm going to cool this just a little bit to kind of their skin tones, okay? So this is where I would place this look and style up here. And notice that we still have our sky, but it's nice and very bright, okay? Same thing here. I'm gonna apply the previous. I'm gonna zoom in, check their skin tones. Their skin tones look pretty good. And now, again, when I compare these two, you get this bright HDR kind of vibe to it, right? There's gonna be some fun stuff. I'm gonna teach you guys a twice baking technique later on for combining preset looks and everything. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and go to this image right here. Same thing here, okay? So this is all reset out. Notice that it's a little bit warm to begin with, so I'm going to apply soft light. Okay, so we have a little bit of a warm tone. I'm going to start cooling. Bring the temperature down, the tint down just a little bit, and then start looking for skin tone. There it is right there. Okay. So notice that our skin tones get pretty cool when we're using this kind of look and style. Has this beautiful, clean kind of vibe to it. I love that. Okay, so let's select both these. I'm so used to using my Mac right now. I keep hitting the Command key instead of my Windows key. Okay. Okay, pair them up. Take a look at it. Oh, I love scenes like this. So this is another great one. Let's take a white balance read. Notice that I was a little bit warm in camera. Okay, this is probably the neutral point is like right here. Okay, this is kind of a hard light scene, right? So again, all we're gonna do is just select hard light and it perfectly balances everything. I'm gonna bring the exposure down maybe one little click. And if you want to find a tiny bit of warmth in there, I'm gonna bring it up one click. Same thing on this one. I'm gonna hit previous. This looks great. For this one, this is kind of getting that same, it's still kind of a hard light kind of look to it. So I'm gonna keep it as hard light, okay? Same thing here. Okay, brighten it up a little bit. You can even hit previous and then brighten it up a little bit. That'll keep your same white balance. Again, turn on your vignette correction on these because I do like to make sure my edges are evenly, bright as it goes across. Okay, this one I'm going to reduce contrast just a little bit and bring it down just a bit. Remember, contrast and white balance. That's contrast, white balance, and exposure are really the things that we want you to kind of tweak for each image. Everything else should be pretty close to dialed in. But look at the beautiful, this is like wedding coordinator's dream right here is this kind of look and style. Okay, you pair it along with, this is the actual couple. I love pairing these kind of shots with these details. So I'm gonna go soft light. And usually what I like to say is instead of identifying, what's in the scene, use these more so as identifying how you want it processed. So in this scene, most of the light that's on their faces is already pretty soft. The background light is a little bit hard, but I'm gonna start with soft light, and then if I need to tweak, I can from there. So from here, I'm just gonna take my tint maybe down a little bit, and then I'm gonna bring my white balance up a little bit, okay? I'm gonna get a little bit more brightness to it. And honestly, this is one of those where you could have gone backlit as well, because there is a little bit of a flare and lower contrast, right? So as soon as I select backlight, it does a really great job. And once you select backlight, you can again use contrast to tweak, okay? So if I wanna reduce contrast, I totally can just by bringing it down from that backlit point. So select whatever's gonna get you closest on that single click. Okay, now, again, I can take a look at all three of these images and you can see how beautifully the greens and everything lines up with each other. It looks awesome, despite it being like kind of different lighting conditions in each one of these. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, I gotta throw my kids in there. I hadn't met James at the time yet when I had these, so these are just Ethan and Ellie. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take a white balance read off the eye. That gets me really close, a little bit too pink. One of my favorite rules to kind of use when it comes to white balance, right, is I'll select the preset. So let's say we go soft light. And what I'll do is I'll take a white balance read. At this neutral place, I try to find this spot where there's no warmth in there anymore. It's like, it's just magentas, right? So from here, what I'll do is I'll adjust it to a point where I have just a little bit of green and a little bit of red. And so you ride right here on that balance, right about there. So from right here, I might go up one click and then I add my warmth back, okay? And then when you go that route, you nail it every single time and it looks beautifully perfect each time, okay? So what I might do here is I might add a little bit more contrast to the image and that looks gorgeous. I'm gonna go ahead and go to this next one, press previous. I love it. Go to this next one, press previous, same thing. And now you take a look at all three of these and you have this beautiful styling. I love that. Ethan's a little bit on the cold side and this middle image is a little bit on the warm side. So what I might do is make a little tweak there and then take Ethan just up a little bit. Okay, and maybe brighten his by one little notch. Perfect. Okay. This is another one of my favorite scenes. Let's do a couple from, actually let's do this scene. Okay, so this, where we have a lot of hard light landing on the body of the dress, is where I would select hard light. And again, look at this. This is where it's shot. Okay, so it looks good in terms of exposure. It's a little bit on the warm side in terms of skin. So warmth should have been like probably like here, 5,000 Kelvin. Apply it, and look how nice that looks. All I'm gonna do is find the right brightness, do no vignette, add the radial to kind of correct for the over reverse vignette on that. And then I'm just gonna move this right up to here. And now all I'm gonna do is just find that perfect white balance point. And to me, it's like right about here. Just this subtly neutral vibe to it. Right there. Okay. Same thing with this one. Okay, now I would pull his down. Add a tiny bit more warmth. And a little more magentas. Right about there. And you can always compare. Make sure that the greens still match in each side. Make sure that you still like this side. I might say, okay, hers could be just a little bit more warm. There we go. Okay, same thing here. So this is, again, different lighting condition, right? So what if I want to go hard light so it kind of pulls the tones together on this? This already looks fantastic right there. And let's say, actually, this one should be hard light too, without vignette. And let's correct for that crooked horizon. And is that a drone or a bird? That's a bird. Okay. So again, when you compare the two, you should see the same types of blue tones. This one's, of course, going to be darker because of the direction that we're shooting in, but the tones are identical between them. Okay. Let's go down over to, let's see, this spot, because this is one that I wanted to show you guys. Again, building in those perfectly imperfect details, right? And for this one, it's the highlights that are crossing the body. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take a white balance read off the wall because the wall is fairly neutral. Take it off the spot where you have the same type of light landing on the skin, right? So right here is going to be the most accurate place to do your white balance read because it's close to the same light color that's landing on the face. So from there, all I'm going to do is press hard light. Okay. And almost in a single click, it's perfect. I'm going to add my without vignette. I'm going to go ahead and add my radial burn, and this is going to be close enough to the face that everything is good to go. And that's it, okay? I could even adjust the brightness up or down a little bit, but that is the look. And I might tweak the white balance just a little bit. So I might add a little bit more magentas and just a little bit more to the skin. And that's it. Look at how nicely the highlights kind of transition now between the shadows. Okay, I would apply the same one over all these, so just sync it up. Let's look at this scene. This scene's kind of fun because you have a couple different ways that you can go about this. You can stylistically approach it, or you can do it just based on what it is. So if you imported with soft light, that would look fine. But what we essentially have here is mixed lighting, right? You have kind of a daylight that's coming through. You also have a warm tungsten background. So what I could do, and let me go ahead and select, this is where the white balance is kind of neutral, is about 4,000 Kelvin, okay? So you notice that the presets currently are all grayed out. That's not a problem. That just means that the profile is not yet supporting this raw file. So this was shot off of a A7R4 or something like that, the Sony. Oh no, this is an A9, and the A9 is not listed yet in the developed profile. It's okay, it defaults back to Adobe standard, so it still works just fine. So what I'm gonna do is select soft light, and then I'm gonna flip over to tungsten mix now. And what you'll notice is when we go to tungsten mix, it neutralizes all these blues in the background, right? So now from here, I'm just gonna bring it down. I can choose without a vignette on this one. Okay, I'm gonna keep the skin tones fairly bright, and we're gonna go right there. All right, we get this beautiful kind of bright look to the image. So that's the main thing there. I want you guys to get used to not only processing on the brighter side, but then also working to more neutral colors so that you don't end up with that kind of yellow toning in the image. Now, again, we've done a lot of testing on pastel, but if you notice certain color tone issues, I'd love for you guys to make us aware of them. Feel free to send us images. You guys can post in the Visual Flow preset group because we're going to continue to do tweaks and updates to get it even more dialed in. Remember, when we test over 50,000 images, well, that's a lot of testing. But in the first week that these packs are released, you guys end up getting enough of these and trying it on so many images that within 1 week you've already exceeded the amount the community itself has exceeded the amount of testing that we've done on our own. Okay, so we're gonna keep testing and keep getting it even more refined. So if you have suggestions, let us know. Now let's talk about how do we customize. So let's go ahead and go to this image here. And you know what, let's go to this image. Let's say that we want to apply, so I'm gonna go ahead and apply backlight, okay? I'm gonna take a white balance read, and I'm gonna go ahead and start brightening this up. And right there, it's great. And I go, man, that vignetting's too much. I'm gonna go without vignette. And what I do want though is that radial vignette that can kind of drop right into the center of every one of my images, because this is kind of my style. I'll move it when I need to, right? I wanna now save this into the preset. Okay, so to save that into the preset, what you're gonna do is I would highly recommend first, you're gonna click, like just kind of start from scratch, click backlight, then go without vignette, and then confirm that you want to do the radial. You're just gonna click through the process so you make sure that all those things are the way that you want them to be. If you have any tweaks over here on the HSL and that stuff, that's fine too. But we wanna make sure everything's the way we want it. You're gonna click plus, and instead of right-clicking over like this preset and clicking update, I'd rather you just create a new preset so you don't overwrite. If you do overwrite, not a huge deal. You can always reinstall and you'll be good to go again. But go up to create preset, and this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna create a new grouping. So let's just say Pi VF test. So this is gonna be my test grouping. And I'm gonna say this is going to be pastel, and I'd give it a little name so I can know what it is. Backlit without, and we're gonna say PC is on and radial burn is on. Okay, PC RB. What we're gonna do is click check all. You're gonna deselect white balance, deselect exposure, okay? Then if you want, like if you saved in a graduate filter into this or a radial filter, which we did, we'd leave them turned on. Otherwise we'd turn these off. I usually recommend turning them off unless you really wanna save in a radial filter like we did here, okay? If so, turn it on. Turn off lens profile corrections if you don't want these saved in. But guess what? We added a profile correction without vignette, right? So we're gonna do with lens corrections. You can choose whether you wanna keep transform or not in there. We are gonna leave post-crop vignetting because we did add in like without vignette. We made some adjustments there. So we're gonna leave that on, and then you're gonna press create. Now you've made your new version of this preset, right? So now you have backlight, and then you have that new version that you just made. So by default, I'll show you when we create these presets, by default, it's white balance and exposure turned off, graduate filters are off, lens corrections are off, transform is off. This is how we're saving them out. So that way you can customize, add those things as you want to. And when you move from image to image, so for example, if I drop in a radial filter right now and I apply one of these presets like soft light, and then I flip to soft light for, let's go right white balance so we're not looking at crazy colors. Okay, so let's go, so if I go soft light versus soft light pastel, you'll notice that the radial burn stays in the image as I flip through other things. We do this intentionally because that way, if you do some local dodging and burning, some retouching, whatever it is, and you want to apply a different look, it doesn't overwrite those settings. So that's important to kind of remember. Now you know how to customize your presets. Hopefully you enjoyed the primer. Be sure to join the Visual Flow group on Facebook. So this is where I'm going to be posting a lot of ongoing tips, tricks, education. It's a great place to post your befores and afters. We're going to be always on the lookout for awesome images to feature on the Visual Flow Instagram page. So join up there, and I'll see you all in the next video.